Heading into the second half of the 18th century, Britain stood at the edge of destiny. Its power stretched across oceans and continents, and its ships carried wealth and influence to every corner of the known world. The island kingdom that had once fought for its own survival was now preparing to command the course of global history. No other nation on earth could match its ambition or its reach. Britain was poised to shape the coming age through war industry and empire. The great struggle that announced Britain's arrival was the 7 Years' War. Across the seas, armies clashed and empires hung in the balance. In North America, the British fought the French and their native allies for control of the vast territories that lay between the Atlantic and the Great Lakes. For years, the French held the upper hand. Their soldiers and Indian allies struck swift and deadly blows at Monongahela and Fort William Henry, leaving British pride wounded. But the tides of war began to turn. A blockade cut France from its lifelines, and disease weakened its allies. Britain gathered its strength, relying on its Iroquois partners, and launched a relentless counteroffensive. In 1759, British ships sailed up the St. Lawrence and laid siege to Quebec. When the city surrendered, the fate of French Canada was sealed. The following year, Montreal fell, and all of French Canada came under British control. In the east, another victory was being forged. In India, British forces triumphed at Wandiwash and captured Pondicherry, driving France from its most prized colony. When the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763, the exhausted French ceded their claims. Britain stood alone as the dominant power in both India and North America. But triumph came at a cost. The war had drained Britain's treasury, and the national debt soared. The Crown looked to its colonies to help pay the price. In India, the consequences were swift and dramatic. After the crushing defeat of the Nawab of Bengal at Plassey, the Mughal emperor and other rulers feared the rising tide of British ambition. They formed an alliance to drive the invaders out, but in 1764, at the Battle of Buxar, their armies were crushed. The emperor was forced to surrender control of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In a single stroke, Britain claimed the right to tax and rule millions. The conquest of India had truly begun. Across the Atlantic, another story was unfolding. In the American colonies, resentment simmered beneath the surface. The settlers had fought and died for British victory, yet now they were asked to bear new taxes on sugar paper and tea. To London it seemed only fair, but to the colonists it was tyranny without representation. Voices of dissent echoed through taverns and meeting halls, pamphlets denounced royal power, and crowds gathered in protest. Tension reached breaking point. In 1770, when British soldiers fired on civilians in Boston, the massacre sent shockwaves through the colonies. 3 years later, the anger boiled over when rebels boarded ships and hurled crates of tea into the harbor. The Boston Tea Party marked a point of no return. The Crown responded with force. Boston was closed and colonial leaders were arrested. In April 1775, gunfire erupted at Lexington and Concord. The world heard the first shots of a revolution. Within a year, the colonies were in open war. British troops marched proudly under the Union Jack but were met with fierce resistance from farmers who refused to bow. At Bunker Hill and Boston, the British suffered humiliating setbacks. In July 1776, the Continental Congress declared independence. America was born in defiance. When France entered the conflict in 1777, the British position grew desperate. Though they won battles in the South, their grip on the North weakened. In 1781, General Cornwallis found himself trapped at Yorktown, surrounded by the forces of George Washington and his French allies. On an autumn day, the proud British army surrendered. The Treaty of Paris, 2 years later, acknowledged what could no longer be denied. The United States was free. The loss was a wound to British pride, but not a fatal one. The empire shifted its gaze eastward. With India under its control and Africa on the horizon, Britain began to dream of a new global dominion. The sun had set on the first British Empire, yet it was already rising on the second. In the years that followed, Britain found renewal under the calm but determined leadership of William Pitt the Younger. The nation's finances were in ruins, yet through discipline and reform, Pitt restored stability. His rule brought order at home, while revolution tore through France. When rebellion spread to Ireland, Britain struck hard, crushing the uprising and binding Ireland formally to the crown under the Act of Union in 1801. From that moment, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland stood as one. But across the Channel, a new threat emerged. Napoleon Bonaparte rose from the chaos of the French Revolution to dominate Europe. His armies swept across the continent, and for a time it seemed no power could stop him. Britain alone stood defiant behind its navy and its will. The victory at Trafalgar in 1805, where Admiral Nelson shattered the French fleet, became legend. Though Nelson fell in battle, his sacrifice turned him into an immortal hero. 10 years later, the Duke of Wellington brought an end to Napoleon's reign at Waterloo. Europe was free and Britain's triumph complete. The wars had reshaped Europe, but they also changed Britain itself. For centuries, power had been won through battle, yet now prosperity came from invention and trade. In the workshops of Scotland and England, a new kind of revolution was beginning. When James Watt perfected his steam engine in 1769, he lit a spark that would transform the world. The rhythm of pistons and gears became the heartbeat of a new age. Machines wove cloth faster than human hands. Steamships crossed oceans. Trains thundered through the countryside, linking cities and hearts. Coal was the black gold that fueled it all. Miners dug deep beneath the earth, risking collapse and choking dust for a wage that kept their families alive. Children worked in the tunnels, carrying messages and pushing carts through the darkness. The mines were dangerous, yet they offered steady work. Entire towns in North England and South Wales grew around them. Out of their hardship rose new ideas of equality and brotherhood. The voices of socialism and reform began to stir. The cities that sprang up around factories were crowded and filthy, yet they pulsed with energy. Smoke hung over the rooftops like a crown of progress. Disease and poverty thrived, but so too did ambition. The Industrial Revolution gave ordinary people new hope of a better life. As literacy spread and wages rose, the working class demanded rights of their own. The Chartists marched for universal suffrage and representation. Though their movement faltered, the seed of democracy had taken root. Meanwhile, the monarchy watched these changes from a distance. The kings of the 18th century had lost much of their power. By the time Queen Victoria took the throne in 1837, Britain was ruled not by royal decree but by the voice of Parliament and the will of the people. Yet Victoria gave the nation something its age demanded: stability, dignity, and the illusion of timeless grandeur. She reigned for 63 years through decades of expansion and discovery. Under her, Britain became the workshop of the world and the ruler of a quarter of the earth. Engineers like Isambard Kingdom Brunel built bridges, railways, and ships that defied imagination. Scientists probed the mysteries of nature, from the structure of the atom to the evolution of life itself. Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection shook the foundations of faith and reason alike. Britain stood as the beacon of knowledge and progress. All of this unfolded under the vast shadow of empire. From Canada to Australia, from Africa to India, red spread across the map like the veins of a living thing. Millions lived under British rule. Some prospered under its protection, while others suffered beneath its weight. The empire claimed moral purpose. Its leaders spoke of spreading civilization, of ending slavery, of bringing light to what they called the dark corners of the earth. Missionaries like David Livingstone became heroes of faith, while soldiers and traders built the empire's wealth. Between 1815 and 1914, 10 million Britons left their homeland to settle its dominions, carrying with them language, law, and belief. In India, the British Raj extended its grasp over hundreds of princely states until nearly the entire subcontinent was under its flag. In Africa, explorers carved new borders, claiming land and lives in the name of progress. The abolition of the slave trade was hailed as a moral triumph, yet it also became a justification for deeper conquest. The scramble for Africa in the late 19th century cloaked greed in virtue. The empire was now a moral mission as much as a political one, and few within Britain dared question it. But beneath the glory, shadows gathered. As the century drew to its close, rival powers began to rise. Germany unified under Prussian might, and its factories and fleets grew at an alarming pace. Nationalist movements stirred within Britain's colonies from India to Egypt. the certainty of empire began to crack. The Boer War at the dawn of the new century exposed the weaknesses that pride had hidden. Against outnumbered farmers in South Africa, Britain struggled. Tens of thousands of men were rejected from service, unfit from poverty and malnutrition. Reports of burned farms and concentration camps stained the empire's reputation. Though Britain won the war, its image as a moral guardian was shaken. At home, the lesson was clear. If Britain could not protect its own people from hunger and disease, then its claim to civilize the world rang hollow. A new generation of leaders took action.